The agenda this week explored the so-called streaming wars and heard the arguments for and against expanding medical assistance in dying to those with mental illness. The agenda's week in review begins with plans to increase immigration to address labor shortages in Canada.
As we learned throughout the pandemic, the world of work is not inseparable from people's housing, people's healthcare, and the safety nets to support those workers. And unfortunately, we have fallen short. When we think about jobs, we need to not only employ people and bring people in through immigration, but also make sure they're decent jobs. And across the economy, we don't yet have equitable pay. We have a disproportionate income for women, for people who are racialized. These problems need to be addressed along with filling the labor shortages. We also need to make sure that people can take time off if they're sick, and they need to make sure that they can care for their families. So we need both the federal government, perhaps through immigration, but also working in tandem with provincial and regional governments to make sure there's decent work, and that the immigrants who are brought into Canada or have an opportunity to work here are given status. It's really hard to support your family, to reunite with your family, to make sure that your healthcare needs are met, to access basic needs if you do fall ill, if you have a precarious status. So we need status for all immigrants on arrival, ideally, as well as decent work and decent jobs.
That is, if I may say, a rather enormous wish list, a lengthy list of agenda items that need satisfying there. How close do you think we are to accomplishing what needs doing?
I think that these are possible. I think that when people work collaboratively, especially having people at the table who are directly impacted by this, we'll have creative solutions. I think if we're only looking at the labor and the economy from the eyes of those who benefit the most, unfortunately those with the capital, then we'll probably have solutions that meet short-term needs, but at the cost of our Canadian society. And a big reason people come to Canada is because of the promise of having a fair and equitable society, and I think we need to work together for this.
Is there anything, Dennis, on that list that you object to?
Of course not. In fact, I know, give you examples of manufacturers who've had to do exactly that because our system isn't so well positioned. So we talk about manufacturers out west, especially who will have language classes, who bring the community together, because often manufacturing plants are not in the big cities downtown. They tend to be in the smaller towns in the suburbs. And so manufacturers do oftentimes have to put their own systems in place or develop that network so that when the people do come, when the families do come, they are able to have some level of integration. Language classes, I was at a plant called Lone Windows out in Manitoba, and they have Ukrainian immigrants, and they have language classes 5 days a week to help bring the folks up to speed, because they know how to read the computers and they know how to look at the numbers on the plant, but in terms of general conversation, they're trying to move them ahead. It's stuff we have to think about.
Lev, let me get you into this discussion, because I pointed out at the beginning that this new plan has some significant regional aspects to it. And I wonder how significant you think that is to the overall potential success of what we're trying to do here.
I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think it's nearly enough.
The 1.5 million?
No, I think in terms of the regional programs,
Okay.
I don't think they're enough. I think provinces should be given greater powers to fill labor needs, but also to build communities, societies, and to actually achieve their objectives, as opposed to having the federal government take in a lot of immigrants who ultimately then settle in a few places like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver.
So how would you fix it?
So I think it's a step in the right direction, but we do need to increase provincial quotas. We also need to cut red tape, frankly, because a lot of our immigrants are coming from the labor force. They come in as temporary foreign workers, and that term in itself is a bit misleading, because quite often to become a permanent resident, you start as a temporary foreign worker, and employers are facing a lot of red tape in being able to bring workers in and being able to ultimately take care of them, because that red tape sometimes takes away from other programs.
What's
right?
the red
So,
tape? What are you talking about?
well, for example, to hire a temporary foreign worker, let's say in manufacture, the employer has to fill in like a 16-page form, advertise for the position in a very specific way, provide a bunch of financial documents, go through compliance audits and so on, just to bring in a worker.
It's too much.
When, for example, there's a recognized labor shortage. I was recently speaking to a client whose employer tried to do that on their own. It's a small tool and die shop, I don't remember, I think it's in Hanover, Ontario. And essentially they got rejected because the paperwork was so complicated. They had to hire a lawyer and go through that. I'm an immigration lawyer. I'm mostly on the immigration litigation refugee side. But frankly, a lot of this stuff companies should be able to achieve without lawyers. So cut red tape, give provinces more power to welcome immigrants and to sort of meet targets. And also make sure that the system is equitable, so people are not waiting for 6 weeks or 6 months to 12 months for a work permit, so that families are not waiting for years for permanent residency, because that ultimately takes away from their ability to integrate. They're not sure whether they're going to stay or whether they're going to have to go back. So a step in the right direction, but more needs to be done.
Let me get all of you to weigh in on, let me put it this way. I can imagine there are people watching us or listening to us right now who are saying, this is a great deal of effort being undertaken to bring new people who are not yet here to our country, and it takes the government's eye off the ball of trying to do a better job for those people who are already here. I can imagine that view being expressed. Rebecca, can you weigh in on that and tell me whether you think that is an acceptable view to hold in this case?
Well, I think I would, maybe caveat it a little bit, is that what these very ambitious immigration targets are showing us, they're exacerbating some of the challenges that exist. So they're not related necessarily to newcomers coming to the country as much as, structural challenges we've had as a country. And I'll just point to 3 examples that, I would argue speaks that we need a more holistic approach beyond just immigration. But one, we have very weak productivity. And that really, we've basically been growing on labor. So we need, better incentives to invest in capital and invest more in people as well. So that is independent of whether we're bringing more Canadians into the country or not, or more newcomers. A second big problem that we have is that we have growing gaps in our infrastructure, our social infrastructure, health, education. And so again, that is something that, a growing population is going to exacerbate, but those exist regardless of whether we bring in more Canadians. And the third challenge I would say is around housing supply. We all know what's gone on in housing markets. And so I would say, growing our population, while in the long term it's a net positive, the numbers alone will exacerbate these pre-existing challenges. So I think we do, that does beg the question of, yes, very ambitious targets can be good in the long run, but you need to figure out kind of those milestones along the way to make sure that it's not a bumpy road that actually could lead to backlash and lead to Canadians asking that very question that you suggest.
Let me get you all to react to, you want to bring this up, Sheldon? Here's Travis Andrews writing in the Washington Post, saying just when streaming has finally attracted more viewers than cable or broadcast TV, its major players are engaged in a long-predicted war for subscribers, who are becoming all too aware of rising subscription prices and, both subtly and directly, a change in what programs get made and how long they stick around. Commercials could soon become more common, and services may be bundled for one low monthly price, ! Already triggering visions of a future that recalls the dark days of cable. Now, here's what they mean. We got another graphic here with some of the latest of what everybody can get here. We got streaming services and then the cost. Amazon Prime, almost $10 a month. CBC Gem, Premium, almost $5 a month. Crave at almost $20 a month. Disney Plus, almost $12 a month. Netflix, of course, big range here from maybe $6 to $21 a month. And Paramount Plus, the old $9.99 a month. Now, if you add all that up, it's around $63 a month. So the question then becomes, are we back at cable here for $63 a month?
But you're missing a price from your chart there, which
me.
is free. This is the latest thing, which is people upset about those prices. People looking at it and thinking, why did I cut my cord if I'm forking over $70 or $80 a month? And so now you have this thing called FAST, free ad-supported television. Last week, Pluto TV comes to Canada. This is Corus and Paramount working together. You go on the website, there's nothing to sign in. It's just ad-supported. You start watching an old Beverly Hills 90210 or whatnot, and every now and then you're bothered by commercials, but you're not bothered by those monthly bills. And I think that is a direct reaction to, we cut the cord, but then what did we get? And so in a very strange way, we're going back to cable, not with the same level of access and maybe even the same level of quality programming,
Bingo.
but
Bingo.
But yeah, well,
you're not going to
exactly.
get Yellowstone on fast, are
No,
you?
you're not. No, you're not. And I think at the end of the day, quality is king. And so you need those shows. You need your Game of Thrones. You need your Lord of the Rings. You still need those programs that are going to drive people to subscribe or come back or whatnot. But this new tier, which is the free tier, is, I think, a symptom of the frustration that a lot of people have.
But if we're getting back to monthly fees here, and then even some ad-supported streaming services as well, have we just traded in streamers from cable?
I mean, it's easy to say that it looks that way,
Yeah.
for sure. And, you know, it's funny that you talk about the shows that come back, these syndicated shows. I remember, you know, coming home from school and it was MASH and Golden Girls and all these shows that were in syndication. And we left that world for a while because everyone was competing with what was new. And, you know, you were saying you watch something, you talk about it for a day, and the lifespan of these shows is quite short. I'm also, though, you know, a believer in the ingenuity of the audience or the customers, and I think there's going to be pushback there where it's not just, okay, well, we want ad-supported content, but I've been noticing, you know, peers and, you know, different people talking about the ways that they're hacking the system. And so, for instance, you know, Black Friday was a couple of weeks ago, and someone was making a list, a Google Doc of a shared list of all the media outlets, all the media sources you could get on sale, where, you know, it was $1 for an annual subscription to this magazine, this streaming platform, and even more granular, where they would say, you know, don't sign up for yourself, sign up as a friend, so after a year it doesn't auto-renew on your credit card. People are really conscious of what they're spending and trying to push back a little bit. I also think, you know, if it is about quality being you know, what's dominant here, and people do have multiple services, it may be sort of, well, let's watch this one. Once we've tapped it out, we'll just cancel the subscription for a while, hop over to something else.
People do that?
Yes.
They do that.
Oh yeah, I want to see Succession. Then if I don't need to see anything else on HBO, I'll just cancel it later. Same with Yellowstone, as you said. Though I don't think you can actually get the new Yellowstone episodes on Paramount Plus. I signed up my mother for it because that's what she wanted, and then she's like, I
Signed
can't
up
even
your
watch
mom.
it. It has to be Paramount Network. So that's another problem: is you're going to these places because of the shows, and then sometimes after 6 months or a year, they're not there anymore. They're on Peacock, so you have to go get Peacock to be able to watch Friends. You have to be able to be pretty nimble and keep up with where they're putting these shows.
And frankly, I don't think Netflix has had enough of those big must-see shows to keep people locked in for the year. So you got your Stranger Things, you got your Bridgerton. More recently, you have Wednesday, which is about Wednesday Addams from the Addams Family. Those are the big three kind of hits, and I guess Squid Game. But other than that, they have been trying. Their problem is they're kind of the glory days of Netflix, where we didn't realize we were now in this new kind of world of streamers competing with each other, and they still had some of the content from the other big studios. But then the studios woke up and went, no, I'll take my Avengers back, and I'll take my Star Wars back, and I'll take all this and that. And so now they're trying to stock the shelves with their own franchises and own must-see brands, but creating content out of nothing is not that easy. And I think they're still struggling to find that sweet spot.
Juliana, how do you think people are either reacting or going to react to the notion of ads on Netflix, and even beyond that, charging people to share passwords with family and friends?
I think people just get used to it. So either they'll be okay with ads or they'll pay the extra money not to be able to sit through them. I know a lot of the time with TV, my partner sits at home and it's background noise for other things. So he doesn't mind that there's an ad or two. So for him, it's not a huge problem. But I think at some point, it's all about how can you aggregate all these, you know, channels together so it's just easier to get to and it's easier to find. I think sometimes, you know, it really does come down to convenience more so than even money sometimes. Yeah.
No one wants to pay more for something they've been getting already
Right.
Yeah.
included, but how do you think people react to the notion of paying more to share passwords and so on?
Oh my goodness. I think that people will be really frustrated by it, especially because this is the internet. This is the internet, which, you know, was meant to be
free.
you know, when we talk about ads, I feel like, you know, the one that we aren't talking about is also Amazon, which is in the, you know, this is very Big Brother and a little dystopian when you think about it, but it's sort of in the best situation to like have an amazing show or just a kind of, you know, entertaining reality show, but they're kind of pushing the pants that she's wearing and pushing that product that's in the back and, you know, click and buy it the next day. And I would probably order something every night. Like I'm not the only one that way. I think there's going to be a lot of different models, and it's not necessarily going to be, cereal and insurance and the same kind of ads that we've seen in the past.
Can you talk about that? How well is that working? Because of course, not just the possibility of ads or products that their characters and shows are watching, but they've got data on us as well, right? Are they monetizing that very well?
That's a fascinating question, and it really, the early days of all these streaming platforms was very much a conversation that was in line with Facebook and Twitter, that, they have that granular data. They can target us. They could target specific niche audiences. But, if they're pouring millions of dollars into an episode, they don't want it for that specific niche audience. They want it for that audience that we were saying that they were going to move away from, which is those broader Nielsen groups, right? And so I think what's interesting is, maybe not so much using that information to target audiences when it's content creation. There's still only so many great stories that get told in different ways, but I think it might be more around how we engage.
Let's put a face to this story. John Scully is a name that may ring a bell with some people. He's a former television reporter. He has been advocating for access to MAID. He was on W5, the CTV program, and he described his circumstances thus. Sheldon, the clip, please.
I wake up sick and loathing the day that's to come. I'm in fear of the day that's to come because during the night, I've had horrific nightmares and anxiety dreams that fill me with sweat and dread.
Did any treatment work? You've tried everything.
Everything. There's nothing to try for me, nothing left. I've tried every single so-called cure, in quotes. I've tried, there's nothing I haven't tried that I know of.
John's been in a Toronto psychiatric hospital 7 times. He's tried electroconvulsive therapy 19 times. He now takes dozens of pills just to get through the day. And after 35 long years of treatment, still no improvement.
I'm thinking, that's why I'm choosing MAID, because I don't want to botch it again. I screwed up twice trying to kill myself.
I've known John Scully for 30 years. I used to work with him at CBC. That really puts a face to the story. Ramona Coelho, what do you want to say to him?
Oh, I'm very sympathetic to his plight, of course. There's a few things I'd like to say. Well, we're talking about a state giving the right of someone to end someone else's life with mental illness. So this is a population discussion, not a conversation of one. I don't doubt that there are some people with irremediable mental illness. The question is, can we identify them correctly? And really, is structural inequalities playing into that? The other thing that I'd like to say, and that I'm sure Dr. Gained could comment on, or Dr. Lee more than me, because I don't know the stats perfectly, is that in the Benelux countries, in jurisdictions that have legalized assisted suicide and euthanasia, suicide rates have gone up, which I think speaks to the question of the contagion of despair, the risk of the contagion of despair.
You're sure there's a connection between these two things?
No, I'm raising the question that I don't think that we've thought about this enough. Could there be a contagion of despair? What happens when you create access? We know that access to lethal means and other things like guns or pesticides, suicide rates go up. What is going to happen to our society when we legislate that, like when we go forward? Have we thought about these things? We need to think about Mr. Scully. I mean, that's very important, but we also have to think about the whole population.
Well, let me put that to Dr. Lee, because here's an example where I guess the experts are responsible for having to create policies that can cover the vast population of the country, but then you see that single example. I don't know about you. I mean, my heart breaks for the guy. Everybody's heart breaks for the guy.
Yeah.
How do we figure that out, where we can create one policy for all and yet help him?
You know, I think it comes back to a point that Andre has written about, right? That we're trying as a society to decide where we stand on the balance between autonomy and protecting the vulnerable. And I want to use the word autonomy versus protection, not paternalism, right? Because paternalism is not a defensible position. No one wants to be paternalistic. It's really about protection. And I'd say that in this debate, there's actually been too much heat and not enough light, right? That there actually is a way of looking at individual cases where I think that you have to, I feel a lot, again, for what John Scully is saying, and I think that when we're trying to protect vulnerable people, we have to think about vulnerabilities beyond just are they accessing services? That's one of them, but also there are many structural and social vulnerabilities. And I think when I start with an individual patient, my first question is, are they vulnerable? I would never make a decision based on a 1-minute video whether somebody is eligible for MAID or not. But on the surface, looking at his video, he didn't strike me as vulnerable. But I know a little bit about his case. I'd like to know more about his trauma. I'd like to know about his relationships. I'd like to know more about his personality. I'd like to know...
Does any of that matter when he is clear in his own mind this is what he wants?
It is if there's a source of vulnerability there. And I have a role as a clinician to protect that. And what I would say is that the desire for death is really way more complex than people think. It's a collapse of complexity to bring it down to, are you psychotic and delusional or impulsively suicidal or not, right? That's too simplistic. I think people want to die for a multitude of social, psychological, and unconscious factors, and we need to help them understand that.
Dr. Gant, what do you see this case of John Scully? What do you think?
So I see the case, my heart goes out for him. And I think for any empathic human, that would be the natural reaction. I also think that we have to base our policies not on individual cases, but on how they will affect everyone as a population. And I would reframe, actually, Mr. Picard's question. Rather than asking, can we ever get it right? I think the real question is, which mistakes do we want to make? And that reframes it in a different way, because what we know is that when we expand assisted dying beyond end-of-life situations, people shift what they are seeking death for. As Dr. Lee was mentioning, people seek death for different reasons. When MAID is provided and the end of life is foreseeable, people seek it to avoid suffering from a painful death. When we extend it further and further from death, people seek it to avoid a painful life. They seek it as escape from a painful life, and that's what the data in the Benelux countries shows.
Does that matter, though?
Yes, it does, because what we're doing is we're shifting who is actually seeking it for social reasons that we could fix in other ways. I will use a burning building analogy. A greatly esteemed colleague, Dr. Harvey Chochinov, he's used the analogy of it not being true autonomy if you have a burning building and somebody decides to jump from that. That's not true autonomy about them wanting to end their lives. We are setting up for the marginalized people in our society who are the ones who actually preferentially get MAID in Benelux countries when it's expanded to psychiatric euthanasia, 2-to-1 women to men as well, by the way. Increased rates of poverty and social suffering once you expand it. We're taking this and the burning building, those are our policies. Those are our social policies that have led people to these marginalized situations and sometimes even set fire to the building. Our governments, those are the landlords. And what I would suggest to you is that rather than saying, put out the fire, stop the burning, design a safer building, or let's lead people to a safer exit, I think that people who are saying on the side, for example, and Mr. Picard, you're saying that it's autonomy to help the person jump here. I think that out the window, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's a truly autonomous choice.
Okay, let's let him respond. Andre Picard, you want to come back in here?
Well, I don't think it's a good choice to say stay in the building and keep burning. That's what we're saying. We're saying keep suffering. We can't give you an out. Why? Well, because you're poor, because we don't take mental health problems as seriously as physical health ones like cancer. I agree that we really have to improve our access to mental health care. I'd love to have no fire in the building, but the answer is not to say no one can have an out because it makes us uncomfortable.
That's just some of what we've covered this week. You can find more, including the full conversations, on our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.